Baby found a collapsed mother bear in the drainage pipe. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of the small cottage where the Wilson family lived. Little Noah, just 15 months old, played with his colorful blocks on the living room carpet. His mother, Emma, hummed softly in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast, occasionally glancing at her son through the open doorway. Noah's father, Daniel, had left early for work, promising to be back before dinner. Their cottage sat on the edge of Pine Creek Forest, a beautiful but sometimes dangerous place where wildlife roamed freely. A large drainage pipe ran beneath their gravel driveway, connecting to a small stream that flowed through their property. Usually, the pipe remained empty except during heavy rainfall, but today was different. As Emma turned away to pour herself a cup of coffee, Noah's keen ears caught a strange sound coming from outside. It wasn't the cheerful chirping of birds or the gentle rustling of leaves. It was a deep, pained groan that somehow drew the baby's attention. Noah looked toward the open window, his curious blue eyes widening. The sound came again, louder, more urgent. With the determination that only toddlers possess, Noah pulled himself up using the coffee table and wobbled toward the partially open patio door. Emma didn't notice as she answered a phone call from her sister, turning her back to the living room. "Yes, we're still coming for dinner on Sunday," she said, completely unaware that her son had managed to push the door open wider. Noah stepped onto the wooden deck, the cool morning air brushing against his chubby cheeks. The strange noise continued, pulling him forward like an invisible string. Step by step, he made his way down the 3 shallow deck stairs, his tiny hands gripping the railing for support. The groaning grew louder as Noah toddled across the dewy grass. His dinosaur pajamas became damp at the knees when he crawled the last few feet toward the large drainage pipe that extended from beneath the driveway. The concrete cylinder was dark inside, but Noah could see something moving, something large and furry. Inside the drainage pipe lay a massive brown bear, her breathing labored and her eyes half closed in pain. Blood matted the fur on her right front paw, and her powerful body trembled with each breath. She had somehow crawled into the pipe, perhaps seeking shelter after being injured, but now appeared too weak to move further. Any adult would have run in terror, screaming for help or calling animal control. But Noah knew nothing of the danger before him. He only understood that something was hurting, and in his innocent heart, he wanted to help. The mother bear's eyes slowly focused on the small human before her. For a breathless moment, their gazes locked, the ancient wisdom of the wilderness meeting the pure, unafraid compassion of a child who had not yet learned to fear. The bear made no move to attack, too weak perhaps, or maybe recognizing something in Noah's gentle approach. Emma's voice called out from inside the house, "Noah? Where are you, sweetie?" Her tone shifted from casual to concerned as she realized she didn't see her son in the living room. But Noah didn't answer. He was too focused on the bear, whose eyes seemed to be pleading for something. The baby took another step closer to the pipe, completely unaware that he was approaching one of nature's most dangerous predators. What happened next would leave everyone who witnessed it completely speechless. Emma's heart nearly stopped when she stepped onto the deck and saw her baby boy crouched at the entrance of the drainage pipe. "Noah!" she screamed, her voice breaking with terror. She sprinted across the yard, nearly stumbling in her panicked rush. But when she got close enough to see what was inside the pipe, her scream caught in her throat, replaced by a horrified gasp. The massive brown bear lay just feet away from her precious child. Its eyes, dark pools of pain and exhaustion locked onto Emma's. She froze, afraid that any sudden movement might provoke the injured animal to attack. Her maternal instincts screamed at her to snatch Noah away, but her rational mind warned that such a swift action might startle the bear. "Noah, baby," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "Come to Mommy, very slowly." But Noah didn't seem to register his mother's fear. Instead, he pointed at the bear's injured paw and made a sympathetic cooing sound. "Boo-boo," he said clearly, one of the few words in his limited vocabulary. "Boo-boo." The bear's massive head tilted slightly, as if puzzled by the tiny human's lack of fear. Emma stood paralyzed, her phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. She had already dialed 911, but hadn't yet pressed the call button. A part of her feared that even speaking to the dispatcher might somehow break the strange spell that seemed to keep the bear passive. Noah reached out a pudgy hand toward the bear's snout, and Emma's breath caught painfully in her chest. "Noah, no," she whispered urgently. But it was too late. Noah's small fingers brushed against the bear's nose. Emma prepared herself for the worst, ready to throw herself between her child and the wild animal, knowing it would likely cost her life but unable to conceive of any other option. Yet the attack never came. Instead, the bear made a soft, rumbling sound. Not a growl of aggression, but a whimper of pain. Noah patted the bear's nose again, babbling in his baby language as if trying to comfort the massive creature. The bear's massive head lowered, her eyes half closing as if in surrender. It was then that Emma noticed something even more shocking. Behind the injured bear, in the deeper shadows of the drainage pipe, several tiny forms squirmed and mewled softly. Cubs, at least 3 of them, impossibly small compared to their mother, huddled together in the darkness. The mother bear hadn't sought shelter in the pipe merely for herself. She was protecting her babies. Emma slowly, carefully lowered herself to a crouching position, maintaining her distance but trying to get a better look. The mother bear's injury was worse than she'd initially thought. A deep gash ran along her right front leg, still seeping blood. The wound looked infected, swollen and angry against her dark fur. The bear was clearly feverish. Her breathing labored and her eyes glazed with pain. "She's dying," Emma realized with a jolt. The mother bear had crawled into this pipe to shelter her cubs as she grew weaker, perhaps knowing she couldn't protect them much longer. The thought brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. Despite her fear, she felt a surge of empathy for the suffering animal. One mother to another. Noah seemed to sense the gravity of the situation in his own innocent way. He turned to look at his mother, his blue eyes wide with concern. "Mama," he said, pointing at the bear and then at the squirming cubs. "Mama." Emma's heart clenched. Somehow, her baby boy understood what was happening better than she did. The bear wasn't a threat. She was a desperate mother trying to protect her children until the very end. With trembling fingers, Emma pressed the call button on her phone, raising it to her ear. When the dispatcher answered, she spoke quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, I need help. There's an injured bear with cubs in a drainage pipe on my property. She's very badly hurt and my baby is—" Emma swallowed hard, watching as Noah continued to gently pat the bear's nose. "My baby is somehow comforting her. Please send wildlife services right away. Tell them to hurry, but not to come with sirens. I think she's dying." The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way, but it would take at least 20 minutes for wildlife services to reach their remote location. Emma ended the call, her mind racing. 20 minutes felt like an eternity with her child so close to a wild predator, even one as weakened as this bear. Just then, Noah did something that made Emma's heart leap into her throat. He turned away from the bear and began to toddle back toward the house. "Noah, come here," Emma said, relieved that he was finally moving away from danger. But Noah ignored her, his determined little face set in concentration as he wobbled toward the porch steps. "Noah," Emma called, louder this time, afraid to take her eyes off the bear but desperate to grab her son. To her bewilderment, Noah disappeared into the house, returning moments later with his sippy cup of water clutched in both hands. Before Emma could react, he was making his way back to the drainage pipe, careful not to spill his precious cargo. "Noah, no." Emma moved to intercept him, but stopped when the mother bear raised her head slightly, those dark eyes tracking her movement. Emma froze again, torn between her fear of the bear and her fear for her child. Noah reached the pipe and, with the careful concentration that only toddlers can muster for important tasks, held out his sippy cup to the injured bear. The bear sniffed at it cautiously, her dry nose twitching. "Water," Noah said clearly, another word he knew well. Water. To Emma's astonishment, the mother bear extended her tongue, dry and cracked from dehydration, and lapped weakly at the trickle of water that Noah squeezed from his cup. The bear's eyes never left the child's face, a strange understanding passing between them that transcended species. It was at that moment that Emma heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Her neighbor, Robert Miller, had arrived unexpectedly. Robert was a retired veterinarian who often stopped by with fresh eggs from his farm. His timing couldn't have been more fortuitous. "Emma," he called out, shutting his truck door. "I brought those eggs I promised." Robert stopped dead when he rounded the corner and took in the scene before him. Emma frozen in place, Noah offering his sippy cup to an injured bear, and the bear accepting this offering with a gentleness that defied all natural instinct. "Don't move," Robert whispered, his years of experience with animals evident in his calm demeanor. "That's the mother bear they've been tracking. Radio collar on her neck, see it? She disappeared from their monitors 3 days ago." Emma hadn't even noticed the small black collar nearly hidden in the bear's thick fur. "She's hurt," she whispered back, "and there are cubs." Robert nodded, his weathered face grim. "I can see. Looks like she might have been hit by a car or got into a fight with another predator." His experienced eyes took in the severity of the wound. "She came here to die, Emma. Bears sometimes seek out sheltered places when they know the end is near." Noah was now patting the bear's head with his free hand, babbling soothingly. The sight was so incongruous, so impossible, that Emma felt as if she'd stepped into a dream. "Wildlife services are on their way," she told Robert. 20 minutes, they said." Robert shook his head slowly. "She might not have 20 minutes, judging by that wound. And if she dies, those cubs won't survive without intervention." A new fear gripped Emma's heart. What if she gets aggressive when they try to take her cubs? In her condition, I don't think she could, even if she wanted to, Robert replied quietly. "But we need to get your boy away from there just to be safe." As if sensing their concern, the mother bear made a soft, huffing sound. To their amazement, she nudged one of her cubs forward with her nose, pushing the tiny creature toward the entrance of the pipe where Noah stood. The cub, no larger than a puppy, stumbled into the light, blinking and disoriented. Noah's face lit up with delight. "Baby!" he exclaimed, pointing at the cub. "Baby bear!" The mother bear nudged another cub forward, and then another. All three were soon huddled at the entrance of the pipe, their small bodies trembling with fear and confusion. Emma understood then what was happening. The mother bear, sensing her own coming death, was entrusting her babies to the strange, kind little human who had shown her compassion. It was as if she recognized something in Noah, an innocence and goodness that transcended the natural boundaries between predator and prey, wild and tame. The realization brought fresh tears to Emma's eyes. This wasn't just an injured animal seeking shelter. This was a mother's final desperate act of love for her children. Robert seemed to understand too. "I've never seen anything like this in 40 years of veterinary practice," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "It's as if she knows." Emma saw Noah reach out to gently touch one of the cubs, his tiny hand stroking the small head with remarkable gentleness for a child his age. The mother bear watched, her eyes growing duller by the minute, but a certain peace seemed to settle over her massive form. Just then, an unexpected vehicle pulled into their driveway. Emma recognized her husband Daniel's truck immediately. He must have forgotten something at home and returned to retrieve it. She heard his door slam and his footsteps approaching around the side of the house. "Emma? What's going on? I saw Robert's truck and—" Daniel's words died in his throat as he took in the extraordinary scene before him. His face drained of color when he spotted Noah surrounded by bear cubs, with their massive mother lying just feet away. "Don't move," Robert warned him quietly. "Everything's under control. Wildlife services are on their way." Daniel looked like he might faint. Are those bears?" Emma confirmed, her voice strangely calm now. "She's dying, Daniel. She's giving us her cubs." As if to confirm Emma's words, the mother bear let out a long, shuddering breath. Her eyes, fixed on her cubs now safely huddled around Noah, slowly began to close. One massive paw twitched, then went still. She made no further sound, no further movement. Noah, sensing the change, looked up at his parents with a profoundly solemn expression that seemed far too mature for his baby face. "Mama bear sleep," he said softly, pointing at the now still form in the pipe. Emma felt a tear slide down her cheek. "Yes, baby, Mama bear is sleeping." The cubs, as if understanding that something momentous had occurred, began to whimper and nudge at Noah, seeking comfort from the only gentle presence they could find. Their mother, after ensuring their safety one last time, had quietly slipped away. Robert moved carefully toward the drainage pipe, his experienced gaze confirming what they already knew. "She's gone," he said softly, kneeling beside the massive form. "Poor thing fought as long as she could." Daniel, still processing the unbelievable scene before him, finally found his voice. "We need to get Noah away from those cubs," he insisted, his protective instincts flaring. "They're still wild animals." Emma shook her head, watching in wonder as her son gently stroked the smallest cub's head. The tiny bears showed no sign of aggression, only confusion and distress at their mother's stillness. "Look at them, Daniel. They're babies. They're scared." "Without their mother, they don't stand a chance in the wild," Robert explained, his veterinary knowledge taking over. "Black bear cubs need their mother for at least a year and a half. These little ones can't be more than 2 months old." The wail of sirens in the distance announced the approaching wildlife services. Daniel ran to the end of the driveway to flag them down, while Emma remained fixed in place, watching her son interact with the orphaned cubs. Noah seemed to understand instinctively how to be gentle with the frightened creatures, speaking to them in soft, soothing tones as if they were his own stuffed animals come to life. Within minutes, 2 wildlife officers approached cautiously, tranquilizer guns at the ready. They stopped short when they saw the scene, exchanging baffled glances. "I've never seen anything like this," the female officer whispered, lowering her weapon. "How is that child not being attacked?" Robert stepped forward, explaining the situation in quiet, measured tones. The mother just passed. She was severely injured, probably hit by a vehicle. But before she died, she seemed to entrust her cubs to the boy. The male officer shook his head in disbelief. That's not possible. Bears don't— I know what bears typically do, Robert interrupted firmly. I've worked with wildlife for 40 years. What I'm telling you is what we all witnessed. That mother bear chose to trust her cubs to this child in her final moments. Emma finally found the courage to approach Noah and the orphaned cubs. Moving slowly so as not to startle the young bears, she knelt beside her son. "Noah, sweetie," she said gently. "These people are going to help the baby bears. They need to take them somewhere safe." Noah looked up at his mother, his blue eyes wide with concern. "Fix Boo-Boo?" he asked, pointing at the cubs. Emma's heart melted. "Yes, baby. They'll fix their boo-boos and take care of them now that their mama is gone." The wildlife officers approached cautiously with special transport carriers. To everyone's surprise, when they tried to coax the first cub into a carrier, it whimpered and retreated, pressing itself against Noah's side. "They're bonded to him already," the female officer observed with astonishment. "This is unprecedented." After several failed attempts to separate the cubs from Noah, Robert suggested a different approach. What if Noah helps? Maybe if he shows them it's okay, they'll go into the carriers willingly. Daniel looked skeptical, but Emma nodded immediately. "He can do it. Can't you, Noah? Can you help the baby bears?" Noah nodded solemnly, his face a picture of determination. With gentle guidance from the wildlife officers, Noah patted each carrier and said, "Home," in his clear toddler voice. Then, to everyone's amazement, he picked up the smallest cub, which barely weighed more than his stuffed teddy bear, and carefully placed it in the first carrier. The cub went willingly, trusting the small human implicitly. One by one, Noah helped guide each cub into its transport carrier, speaking softly to them the entire time. The wildlife officers exchanged incredulous glances, clearly having never witnessed such a thing in all their years of animal rescue. "These cubs would normally be terrified of humans," the male officer muttered. "This doesn't make any sense." But Emma understood. In the midst of tragedy, something magical had occurred, a connection that transcended the natural order of things. Her son, too young to have learned fear or prejudice, had somehow communicated pure compassion to a dying mother bear, who in turn had trusted him with her most precious possession, her children. As the wildlife officers prepared to transport the cubs to a rehabilitation facility, a local news van pulled into the driveway. Someone, perhaps a neighbor who had spotted the wildlife service vehicles, had alerted the media to the unusual situation. A reporter approached, camera crew in tow, eager for details about the dramatic rescue. Emma hesitated, protective of her son and uncertain about thrusting him into the spotlight. But Daniel squeezed her hand, a silent message passing between them. This was a story worth sharing, a testament to innocence and compassion in its purest form. The female wildlife officer, who had introduced herself as Ranger Martinez, addressed the reporter directly. "What happened here today defies explanation," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "This child somehow formed a connection with an injured mother bear that allowed us to rescue her orphaned cubs without incident. In 20 years of wildlife service, I've never seen anything like it." The reporter turned to Emma and Daniel, microphone extended. "Can you tell us what happened here today?" Daniel stepped forward, his arm around Emma's shoulders. "Our son Noah heard the bear in distress and somehow knew she needed help. He offered her water, comfort, and in return she trusted him with her babies in her final moments. Noah, oblivious to the cameras and attention, stood by the carriers, his small fingers extended through the grates to touch the cubs one last time before they were taken away. "Bye-bye, baby bears," he said softly. The reporter, clearly moved by the scene, asked the question on everyone's mind. "What will happen to the cubs now?" Ranger Martinez explained that the cubs would be taken to a specialized wildlife rehabilitation center where they would be raised with minimal human contact, preparing them for eventual release back into the wild. Thanks to this little boy's intervention, these cubs have a fighting chance. Without him, they would have perished alongside their mother. As the wildlife officers loaded the carriers into their vehicle, Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief that the dangerous situation had resolved peacefully, grief for the mother bear who had fought so hard to protect her young, and overwhelming pride in her son's instinctive kindness. Noah waved as the vehicle pulled away, the cubs' small faces visible through the carrier's grates. "All better soon," he said confidently, as if understanding exactly where they were going and why. Later that evening, after Noah had been bathed and put to bed, exhausted from his extraordinary day, Emma and Daniel sat on their porch, still processing the miraculous events they had witnessed. How did he know? Daniel wondered aloud, staring into the darkness where the drainage pipe was barely visible in the moonlight. How did our baby boy know exactly what to do? Emma leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, watching the stars appear one by one in the evening sky. "I think sometimes children see things more clearly than we do," she said softly. "They haven't learned to fear difference or to separate themselves from nature. Noah didn't see a dangerous predator, he saw a mother in pain, babies who needed help." Daniel nodded slowly, considering her words. "The wildlife officers said they'd keep us updated on the cubs' progress," he mentioned after a while. "They've never seen cubs bond with a human like that before. They think it might actually help with their rehabilitation, knowing that not all humans are threats." A thought occurred to Emma suddenly. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if we asked about visiting them? Not enough to interfere with their return to the wild, but just to check on them occasionally." Noah formed a connection with them. Maybe that connection could help them somehow. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but didn't immediately dismiss the idea. "We can ask. The worst they can say is no." Their conversation was interrupted by the chime of Emma's phone. It was a text from her sister, with a link attached. "Is this your Noah?" Emma opened the link to find a video already going viral on social media. Someone had filmed the entire scene from a distance. Noah comforting the dying bear, the cubs gathering around him, the peaceful transfer to the wildlife officers. The caption read, "Watch, Toddlers Extraordinary. Bond with dying mother bear saves orphaned cubs." "It's already got 10,000 shares," Emma whispered, scrolling through the comments in amazement. People from around the world were responding with messages of hope and wonder. "This restored my faith in humanity. Angels come in all sizes. I'm crying. This child has a special gift. Mother Nature recognizes a pure heart." Daniel read over her shoulder, his expression softening. "Maybe the world needed this story," he suggested, a reminder that compassion crosses all boundaries. That night, as Emma checked on Noah one last time before going to bed herself, she found him sleeping peacefully, his favorite teddy bear clutched to his chest. On impulse, she reached out and touched his soft curls, marveling at the extraordinary soul housed in such a small body. "You're going to change the world someday," she whispered. "You already have." As if in response, Noah smiled in his sleep, dreaming perhaps of 3 small bears finding their way in the world, carrying with them the memory of a tiny human who had shown them the first kindness they had ever known from someone outside their own kind. Outside, in the darkness of the forest that bordered their property, a soft wind rustled through the trees, nature's gentle acknowledgment of the miraculous bond that had formed that day between the wildest of creatures and the purest of hearts. 3 months passed since that extraordinary day. Summer faded into autumn, painting the forest surrounding the Wilson cottage in brilliant reds and golds. The story of Noah and the bear cubs had spread far beyond their small community, becoming something of a modern fairy tale. Wildlife conservation groups had reached out to the family. Journalists had requested interviews, and a children's book author had even asked permission to create a story based on Noah's encounter. Through it all, Emma and Daniel had been careful to shield their son from too much attention, wanting to preserve his innocence and prevent him from becoming a spectacle. They had, however, maintained contact with the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where the 3 cubs, now named Hope, Faith, and Courage by the staff, were thriving under specialized care. On a crisp October morning, Emma's phone rang while she was preparing breakfast. Noah sat in his high chair, happily smashing banana pieces between his fingers. Daniel looked up from his coffee, watching as Emma's expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. "Really? That's incredible," she said into the phone, her free hand reaching for Daniel's arm. "Yes, of course we'd like to come. This afternoon? We'll be there." Daniel raised his eyebrows questioningly as she ended the call. What was that about? Emma sat down, her face flushed with excitement. That was Dr. Patel from the Wildlife Center. She says the cubs are doing remarkably well, developing exactly as they should, learning to forage, showing all the right instincts, but she paused, still processing what she'd heard. They've noticed something unusual. The cubs become agitated when certain staff members approach, but completely calm with others. Dr. Patel says they've identified a pattern. The cubs respond positively to people with small children. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? They think the cubs have formed an association between children and safety because of Noah. Emma reached over to wipe banana from Noah's cheek. They've invited us to visit the center today. Dr. Patel believes it could be beneficial for the cubs' development to see Noah again, to reinforce positive human associations before they're too old and their natural wariness fully sets in. Daniel looked uncertain. Is that safe? For Noah, I mean? Emma nodded. They'll take every precaution. The cubs will be in a controlled environment and will be with wildlife experts the entire time. She glanced at Noah, who was now attempting to stick a banana slice to his forehead. Besides, there was something special between them. Don't you want to see if it's still there? That afternoon, they drove the 40 minutes to the Mountain View Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a sprawling facility nestled at the edge of the state forest. Noah dozed in his car seat, clutching the small stuffed bear that had become his inseparable companion since the incident, a gift from Ranger Martinez. Dr. Ananya Patel greeted them at the entrance, her warm smile putting them immediately at ease. She was younger than Emma had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "Thank you so much for coming," she said, leading them through a security gate and down a winding path. What we've observed with these particular cubs is truly fascinating from a scientific perspective. Black bear cubs typically develop a fear of humans around 3 to 4 months of age, but these 3 still show comfort around certain people, specifically those with a similar, energy to your son. They approached a large naturalistic enclosure surrounded by a viewing area protected by reinforced glass. Inside, Emma could see the cubs exploring a carefully constructed environment, complete with logs, boulders, and small pools of water. They had grown considerably since she'd last seen them. their bodies more muscular, their movements more confident. We've minimized human contact as much as possible, Dr. Patel explained, but we've continued their necessary health checks and monitoring. What's remarkable is that they show elevated stress responses, measured through saliva cortisol levels, when our male staff approach, but remain calm with female staff, especially those who have children. It's as if they've generalized their positive experience with Noah to other similar humans. Noah, now fully awake, pressed his face against the glass, his eyes wide with recognition. "Baby bears!" he exclaimed, pointing excitedly. Dr. Patel smiled. "Not so baby anymore, but yes, the same ones. Would you like to see if they remember you?" Emma felt a flutter of anxiety. How would that work exactly? "We have a protected interaction area," Dr. Patel explained, pointing to a space adjacent to the main enclosure. It has a specialized mesh barrier that allows for visual and olfactory contact but maintains complete physical separation. We'd like to observe how the cubs respond to Noah's presence, purely for research purposes, of course, but also to satisfy our curiosity about this remarkable bond. Daniel hesitated. "And you're certain it's safe?" "Absolutely," Dr. Patel assured them. "The barrier is specifically designed to prevent any physical contact. We use it for controlled exposure therapy with various wildlife. Your family would be in a completely protected space, and we'd have 3 staff members with you at all times." After some discussion, Emma and Daniel agreed. They followed Dr. Patel to the interaction area, where she explained the procedures. They would enter the protected space first, then a staff member would open a sliding door that would allow the cubs to enter the adjoining section if they chose to. "We won't force them," Dr. Patel emphasized. "This is entirely voluntary for the cubs. They may not come at all, and that's perfectly fine. It would actually be a healthy sign of their developing independence." Noah, too young to fully understand the significance of the experiment, was simply excited at the prospect of seeing his bears again. He clutched his stuffed bear in one hand and his father's fingers in the other as they entered the interaction space. A staff member positioned recording equipment in the corners to document the encounter, while another stood near the exit, tranquilizer gun discreetly at the ready, a precaution that made Emma slightly nervous despite her trust in the facility's protocols. "Whenever you're ready," Dr. Patel nodded to her colleague, who operated the mechanism to slide open the dividing door. For several long moments, nothing happened. The opening to the cub's enclosure remained empty, and Noah's initial excitement began to wane. He sat down on the floor, playing with his stuffed bear instead. "This is actually normal, Doctor," Patel whispered. "Wild animals are cautious by nature. They can sense that something has changed in their environment." Just as she finished speaking, a small black nose appeared at the opening, twitching as it sampled the air. Gradually, a furry head emerged. The largest of the 3 cubs, the one Noah had called biggest baby bear during their first encounter. Dr. Patel inhaled sharply. "That's Faith. She's normally the most cautious of the 3. Faith took a tentative step into the interaction area, her dark eyes scanning warily until they landed on Noah. She froze, her ears perking forward in what appeared to be recognition. Noah looked up from his toy and smiled broadly. "Bear," he called, his voice carrying the simple joy of reunion. Something extraordinary happened then. Faith made a soft huffing sound, not alarming, but more like a greeting, and fully entered the interaction space. She approached the mesh barrier cautiously, her nose working overtime to process the familiar scent. "Remarkable," Dr. Patel whispered, making notes on her tablet. "She's displaying recognition behavior." Within moments, the other 2 cubs appeared as well, following their sister's lead. Hope, the smallest, and Courage, the middle cub, joined Faith at the barrier, all three now fixated on Noah. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes as she watched her son scoot closer to the mesh, still maintaining a safe distance as they had instructed him, but clearly delighted by the cub's presence. He held up his stuffed bear as if introducing it to the real ones. "Baby bears, meet Teddy," he explained seriously. To everyone's amazement, the cubs responded to his voice with visible excitement, pacing along the barrier and making soft vocalizations that the researchers identified as comfort sounds, typically reserved for interactions with their mother or siblings. "They remember him," Daniel murmured, squeezing Emma's hand. "After all this time, they actually remember him." Dr. Patel was frantically taking notes, occasionally whispering observations to her colleagues. "This challenges everything we understand about ursine cognition and memory formation in juvenile bears," she said. "The recognition is unmistakable." For nearly 20 minutes, they observed the remarkable interaction. Noah talked to the cubs in his limited vocabulary, occasionally singing fragmented nursery rhymes or offering to share his stuffed bear. The cubs remained attentive the entire time, showing none of the wariness they typically displayed toward human visitors. As the session came to an end, Dr. Patel explained that prolonged exposure wasn't ideal for the cubs' eventual rehabilitation. "We want them to maintain enough natural caution to survive in the wild," she explained. As they prepared to leave, Noah waved goodbye to the cubs. "Bye-bye, baby bears. Be good," he instructed solemnly. To the researchers' further astonishment, all three cubs sat back on their haunches, watching Noah's departure with what could only be described as mournful attention. They remained that way, perfectly still, until the door closed behind the Wilson family. In the debriefing room, Dr. Patel could barely contain her excitement. "What we witnessed today could revolutionize our understanding of human-wildlife connections," she explained, reviewing the footage on a large monitor. "These cubs shouldn't have this level of specific memory formation at their age, especially not after months of separation. And yet, the evidence is undeniable." She turned to Emma and Daniel, her expression serious despite her enthusiasm. "I'd like to propose something, but please feel free to decline if you're uncomfortable. We're developing a new approach to wildlife rehabilitation for orphaned predator species, one that acknowledges that some human contact may actually be beneficial in specific, controlled circumstances. Would you consider allowing Noah to participate in monthly visits with the cubs? Just until they're ready for their soft release next spring." Emma and Daniel exchanged uncertain glances. "What would that involve exactly?" Daniel asked. "Similar to today's interaction. Short, protected visits that would be carefully documented. We believe that maintaining this positive association might actually help the cubs develop healthier stress responses, making them more adaptable and resilient when they return to the wild." Emma thought about it carefully. "And this would help other orphaned animals too, not just our bears." Dr. Patel nodded earnestly. "The data could help us develop better rehabilitation protocols for all sorts of species. Many orphaned predators develop maladaptive behaviors due to trauma. If we can better understand how positive early experiences, even with humans, can mitigate that trauma, we could significantly improve wildlife rehabilitation success rates worldwide." After further discussion and careful consideration, Emma and Daniel agreed to the proposal, with specific conditions to ensure Noah's safety and well-being remained the absolute priority. As they drove home that evening, Noah fell asleep clutching his stuffed bear, a contented smile on his face. Emma gazed out the window at the forest flashing by, thinking about the extraordinary chain of events that had led them here. "Do you ever wonder why it was our son?" she asked Daniel quietly. Of all the people in the world, why did that mother bear choose Noah to trust with her cubs? Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. I think sometimes the universe aligns in ways we can't explain, he finally said. Maybe she recognized something in him, a purity of spirit that transcends the boundaries we create between species. Emma nodded, watching the golden afternoon light filter through the autumn leaves. I think you're right, and I think these visits aren't just about helping the cubs or advancing science. I think Noah was meant to be part of their journey for a reason we might not fully understand yet. Over the following months, Noah's special relationship with the bear cubs continued to flourish during their monthly visits. Each time, the recognition was immediate, and the interaction more complex. The researchers documented everything, amazed by the sophisticated communication that seemed to develop between the young human and the growing bears. By early spring, the cubs had nearly tripled in size, their bodies preparing for independent life in the wild. The rehabilitation team had gradually increased their foraging area and decreased human contact, with Noah's visits being the only regular human interaction they maintained. During what was scheduled to be their final visit before the cubs' soft release, an unexpected development took the researchers by surprise. As Noah played near the mesh barrier, showing the cubs his toy cars, an unfamiliar staff member entered the observation area to deliver equipment. Normally, the cubs would retreat from unfamiliar humans, but this time they merely glanced at the newcomer before returning their attention to Noah. Dr. Patel made a notation, her expression thoughtful. They're generalizing their positive association, she murmured to Emma. They've learned that humans accompanied by Noah don't represent a threat. It's exactly the balanced response we'd hope for, cautious awareness without panic. As they prepared to say their final goodbyes, Dr. Patel pulled Emma and Daniel aside. There's something else you should know, she said quietly. We've been monitoring unusual bear activity in the forest adjacent to your property. Emma felt a chill run through her. What kind of activity? Nothing concerning, Dr. Patel assured her quickly. But there's been a collared male bear, one of our research subjects, who's established a territory that includes the watershed near your home. The drainage pipe where you found the mother bear's actually part of a natural wildlife corridor. Daniel frowned. Should we be worried? Not at all, Doctor, Patel said. Black bears generally avoid human contact. But I wanted you to be aware because when we release the cubs next week, we're planning to do so in a remote section of that same forest system. It's ideal habitat with abundant food sources and natural shelter. Emma understood the implication immediately. You're saying they might eventually find their way to our property. Dr. Patel nodded. It's a possibility, though a remote one. Bears have large territories, and these cubs will likely establish their own well away from human habitation. But the mother bear chose your drainage pipe for a reason. It's a naturally protected space in an area rich with water and food resources. What should we do if we see them? Daniel asked. The same thing you'd do with any wild bear. Maintain a respectful distance and allow them their space. They'll be wearing tracking collars, of course, so we'll know if they approach populated areas. Dr. Patel hesitated. But I suspect that if they did encounter your family again, their response might be different than with other humans. They might display recognition without approaching, the ideal balance for wild animals living near human settlements. As they said their goodbyes to the cubs that day, Emma felt a mixture of sadness and pride. The baby bears weren't babies anymore. They were strong, healthy juvenile bears preparing to reclaim their wild heritage. Noah seemed to understand that something was changing too. He pressed his small hand against the mesh one last time, his expression solemn. Be good bears, he said clearly. Be safe. Dr. Patel later told Emma that the recording of that moment would be used in wildlife conservation presentations around the world, a perfect encapsulation of the delicate, beautiful balance between human compassion and wild freedom. The day of the cubs' release came and went. The Wildlife Center sent photos of the 3 siblings bounding into the forest, their tracking collars barely visible beneath their thick fur. Noah studied the pictures intently before placing them carefully in a special box he had designated for bear things. Life gradually returned to normal for the Wilson family. Noah's 3rd birthday came and went. He began attending a nature-focused preschool program 3 mornings a week, where he showed an uncanny affinity for animals of all kinds. His vocabulary expanded rapidly, though he still spoke of his bears with special affection, often asking when they would visit again. Emma and Daniel gently explained that the bears needed to live in the forest now, just as Noah needed to live in their home. He seemed to accept this explanation, though sometimes they would catch him gazing thoughtfully into the woods beyond their property. Summer arrived again, bringing with it the anniversary of their extraordinary encounter. The Wildlife Center had continued to send occasional updates on the cubs, now officially yearlings, whose tracking data showed them thriving in their natural habitat. They had stayed together longer than most sibling groups, Dr. Patel noted, displaying unusually strong social bonds. On a warm June evening, almost exactly a year after the mother bear had entrusted her cubs to Noah, Emma sat on the porch swing, watching her son play in the yard. Daniel was inside preparing dinner, the scent of grilling vegetables wafting through the open windows. Noah had been digging in his sandbox, but suddenly he went very still, his attention fixed on the edge of the forest. Emma followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual among the dense trees and undergrowth. "Noah? What is it, sweetie?" she called, a hint of concern in her voice. Noah turned to her, his face alight with a joy she hadn't seen since their last visit with the cubs. "Bears watching," he said simply, pointing toward a specific section of underbrush. Emma felt her heart quicken. She scanned the forest edge more carefully this time, and then she saw it. A slight movement among the leaves, the brief flash of something dark and furry. She reached for her phone, ready to call for help if needed, but something made her pause. There was no sense of threat in the atmosphere, no feeling of danger, just a quiet awareness of being observed. "Daniel," she called softly through the open window. "Come here, please." Daniel appeared on the porch moments later, spatula still in hand. "What's up?" Emma pointed toward the forest edge where Noah's attention remained fixed. I think they might be back." Daniel squinted, then inhaled sharply when he spotted what Emma had seen. Not 1, but 3 pairs of eyes visible now among the foliage, watching Noah with unmistakable recognition. "Should I call the Wildlife Center?" he whispered. Emma considered for a moment, then shook her head. "Not yet. They're just watching. They haven't approached." As if in response to her words, one of the bears, the largest, probably Faith, took a single step out of the underbrush, allowing them to see her fully. She had grown into a beautiful young bear, her black coat glossy in the evening sunlight. The tracking collar was still visible around her neck. Noah waved enthusiastically. "Hi, Big Bear," he called. Faith's ears perked forward at the sound of his voice. She made a soft huffing sound, not a growl, but a gentle vocalization that seemed almost like a greeting. Then, with deliberate care, she backed into the forest again, rejoining her siblings in the shadows. For several minutes, the 3 bears continued their quiet observation, maintaining a respectful distance. Noah returned to his sandbox, occasionally looking up to check if his audience remained. The bears showed no inclination to approach closer, seeming content merely to confirm that the small human who had once shown them kindness was still there, still well. Eventually, as the sun began to set, the bears melted deeper into the forest, disappearing as quietly as they had come. Noah waved goodbye, completely unfazed by the extraordinary nature of the visit. That night, after Noah was asleep, Emma and Daniel called Dr. Patel to report the encounter. She was ecstatic, explaining that the tracking data had indeed shown the siblings passing through the area, but this kind of deliberate, non-threatening observation of humans was unprecedented. "They recognized your son, but maintained appropriate wild behavior," she marveled. "It's exactly the outcome we would hope for but rarely achieve in rehabilitation. They've found the perfect balance, remembering their positive human connection without seeking inappropriate contact." In the months that followed, similar brief encounters occurred a handful of times. The three bears would appear at the forest edge, observe for a while, and then continue on their way. They never approached the house, never sought food or direct interaction. They simply checked in, as if reassuring themselves that their human friend was still there. The Wildlife Center documented these visits carefully, developing what they called the Noah Protocol for rehabilitating orphaned predator species, a method that acknowledged the potential benefits of positive, controlled human interaction during critical developmental periods. Noah, growing taller and more articulate with each passing month, seemed to take these visits in stride. To him, it was perfectly natural that the bears would stop by occasionally, just as friends or family might visit. His inherent understanding of this delicate relationship became the subject of numerous scientific papers and conservation initiatives. On Noah's 4th birthday, the family held a small celebration in their backyard. As they were cutting the cake, Emma noticed her son looking toward the forest with his familiar expression of quiet recognition. "Bears watching?" she asked softly. Noah nodded, smiling. "They say, 'Happy birthday,'" he replied with absolute conviction. Emma and Daniel exchanged glances, having long since learned to trust their son's inexplicable connection with the wild siblings. They raised their glasses in a silent toast toward the forest edge, where three dark shapes were just barely visible among the trees. "Thank you," Emma whispered, not entirely sure if she was addressing the bears, the universe, or the memory of a mother bear who had, in her final act of love, created a bridge between two worlds that were never meant to be separate. In the golden afternoon light, the three young bears watched the celebration for a moment longer before turning away, disappearing into the forest that was their true home. They would return occasionally throughout the years, their visits becoming a treasured but increasingly rare occurrence as they expanded their territories and embraced their wild nature more fully. But the connection remained, an invisible thread of understanding binding together a human child and three wild creatures who had, against all odds and expectations, found in each other a reflection of the compassion that transcends all boundaries, all differences, all words. And in that connection lay a truth as ancient as the forest itself, that kindness, offered without expectation or fear, creates bonds that neither time nor distance can sever. It was the mother bear's final gift, not just to her cubs, but to a world desperately in need of remembering that we are all, in the end, part of the same miraculous web of life. 7 years passed. Noah Wilson grew from a toddler into a thoughtful 11-year-old with an uncanny affinity for animals and a quiet wisdom that often surprised adults. His encounter with the mother bear and her cubs had shaped his young life in profound ways, though the visits from faith, hope, and courage had gradually become less frequent as the bears established territories farther from human habitation. The last confirmed sighting had been nearly 2 years ago, a brief glimpse of what they believed was faith, now a fully mature female bear, observing from the forest edge while Noah practiced soccer in the backyard. Dr. Patel's team, which still monitored the siblings' tracking collars, confirmed that all three bears were healthy and thriving in the wild, having successfully integrated into the forest ecosystem despite their unusual upbringing. The Wilson family had changed too. Emma now worked part-time at the Mountain View Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, applying her background in early childhood education to develop programs that taught children about wildlife conservation. Daniel had built a photography studio addition to their cottage, where he created breathtaking wildlife images that were featured in national magazines. And they had welcomed another child, 5-year-old Lily, a spirited little girl with her brother's compassionate heart but a much more talkative nature. Noah's story had inspired significant changes in wildlife rehabilitation practices worldwide. The Noah Protocol, as it had come to be known, had revolutionized approaches to orphaned predator species, introducing carefully controlled positive human interactions during critical developmental periods. The results had been remarkable: significantly higher survival rates for rehabilitated animals, and fewer human-wildlife conflicts in release areas. On a crisp autumn morning, Noah sat at the kitchen table, frowning over his science project outline. His class was participating in a regional wildlife conservation competition, and he had chosen to focus on black bear habitat preservation. Though he rarely spoke publicly about his experience with faith, hope, and courage, his classmates and teachers knew of his special connection to the local bear population. "Mom," he called, tapping his pencil against the paper. "Dr. Patel said the forest corridor that runs through Parker's Creek is being considered for development. That's where our bears live, isn't it?" Emma looked up from helping Lily with her shoes. "Parts of it, yes. The Conservation District has been trying to purchase that land for protection, but they're competing against a resort developer." She sighed, the lines around her eyes deepening. "It's complicated, sweetheart. People need places to live and work, but wildlife needs space too. But if they build there, where will the animals go?" Noah persisted, his brow furrowed with concern. Daniel entered from his studio, catching the end of the conversation. "That's exactly the kind of question your science project could help answer, Noah. Good research can influence community decisions." Noah nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "I want to make a difference, not just for our bears, but for all the animals that need that forest." Later that day, as Noah collected fallen leaves for a habitat diorama, he wandered near the edge of their property, where it met the forest. This had always been his special place, the boundary between the human world and the wild one that had touched his life so profoundly. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Noah stooped to examine a particularly vibrant red maple leaf when a sudden silence fell over the woods. The birds stopped singing, the insects went quiet, and even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Noah straightened slowly, his senses alert to the change. He'd spent enough time near the forest to recognize the signs of a large predator's presence. Normally, he would have retreated toward the house, the protocol his parents had established years ago, but something felt different this time. The silence didn't feel threatening, it felt expectant. "Hello?" he called softly, scanning the underbrush. "Is someone there?" A twig snapped deep within the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy paws on fallen leaves. Noah remained still, his heart quickening but not from fear. From between two ancient oaks, a large black bear emerged. Female, judging by her size and the shape of her head, she moved with deliberate grace, her dark eyes fixed on Noah with unmistakable recognition. "Faith?" he whispered, hardly daring to believe. The bear huffed softly, the same greeting sound he remembered from years ago. It was her. Though Noah had grown and changed, and Faith had matured into a magnificent adult bear, the connection between them remained unbroken. Faith took a few steps closer, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly wanting Noah to see something. She turned her massive head, looking back over her shoulder and making a chuffing sound. From the shadows, two smaller forms appeared. Bear cubs, no more than 6 months old, their fur glossy black and their eyes bright with curiosity. Faith's cubs. She had become a mother herself. Noah stood transfixed, understanding the profound trust Faith was displaying. She had brought her cubs to meet him, just as her own mother had entrusted Faith and her siblings to Noah's care years ago. The circle had completed itself in the most beautiful way imaginable. "They're beautiful," Noah said softly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Thank you for showing them to me." Faith watched him with what seemed like pride, allowing her cubs to explore the forest edge under her watchful eye. They tumbled and played, occasionally glancing curiously at the human boy but showing no fear, only the natural caution their mother had taught them. After a few precious minutes, Faith made a low, grunting sound. Immediately, the cubs returned to her side. With one last meaningful look at Noah, she led her family back into the depths of the forest, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. Overwhelmed with emotion, Noah ran back to the house, bursting through the door with an excitement he couldn't contain. "Mom, Dad, Faith came back. She has cubs of her own now, and she brought them to see me." Emma and Daniel exchanged startled glances. "Are you sure it was Faith?" Daniel asked, reaching for his camera out of habit before stopping himself. This wasn't a moment to be photographed. "Positive," Noah insisted. "She has the same scar on her ear, where the tracking collar used to be, and she recognized me, I know she did. She wanted me to see her cubs." Dr. Patel confirmed later that Faith's tracking collar had stopped transmitting nearly a year earlier. Not unusual as the batteries reached the end of their lifespan, but satellite imagery had indeed shown a female bear with cubs in the forest section bordering the Wilson property. The timing and location matched Noah's account perfectly. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Patel told Emma during a phone call. "We've documented cases of rehabilitated animals returning to release sites, but this kind of deliberate introduction of offspring to a human, it suggests a level of cognitive processing and memory far beyond what we previously attributed to black bears." The encounter reignited Noah's determination to protect the forest corridor. With renewed purpose, he threw himself into his science project, gathering data on local wildlife populations and the critical importance of uninterrupted habitat for their survival. When he learned that the County Planning Commission would be holding a public hearing about the proposed resort development, Noah asked if he could attend and present his findings. Emma and Daniel were hesitant. The hearing would likely be contentious, with strong feelings on both sides of the issue. But Noah's quiet insistence eventually convinced them. "I need to speak for those who can't speak for themselves," he explained with simple conviction. "Faith trusted me with her cubs. I need to protect their home." The evening of the hearing, the county meeting hall was packed with concerned citizens. Representatives from the development company presented sleek renderings of the proposed mountain resort, emphasizing job creation and economic benefits. Conservation advocates countered with environmental impact assessments and habitat preservation arguments. When the floor opened for public comments, Noah approached the microphone, a folder of research clutched in his trembling hands. At 11 years old, he was by far the youngest speaker, and a curious hush fell over the crowd as he adjusted the microphone to his height. "My name is Noah Wilson," he began, his voice initially soft but growing stronger with each word. "Some of you might know me as the boy from the bear story." A ripple of recognition moved through the audience. Noah's encounter with the mother bear and her cubs had become something of a local legend, even among those who hadn't followed the scientific developments it had inspired. "When I was very young," Noah continued, "a mother bear trusted me with the lives of her 3 cubs. I didn't understand then how special that was. I just knew they needed help, and I wanted to give it." He opened his folder, revealing maps of wildlife movement corridors that he and Dr. Patel had prepared. These maps show where animals like bears, deer, and foxes travel through our forests. The red section is where the resort would be built. The audience leaned forward, studying the projected images as Noah explained the research in clear, straightforward terms that belied his young age. "2 days ago," Noah said, his voice catching slightly, "one of those cubs, now a grown mother bear herself, came to the edge of our property. She brought her own cubs with her to show them to me. I believe she was trying to tell me something important." A skeptical murmur rippled through the audience, but Noah pressed on, undeterred. "You might not believe that a bear could think that way, but 7 years ago, most scientists didn't believe a bear would trust a human toddler with her babies either. Sometimes we have to see beyond what we think we know." Noah placed a hand-drawn picture on the overhead projector. A remarkably detailed sketch of Faith and her cubs at the forest edge. "This is what I saw. These bears and all the other animals that live in our forests can't come to meetings like this. They can't vote or write letters or sign petitions, but their lives matter too, and the decisions we make here will determine whether they have a home." He straightened his shoulders, looking directly at the planning commissioners. "The Noah Protocol teaches us that positive connections between species are possible, but only if we respect each other's needs and spaces. These bears have never threatened people. They've kept their distance and lived peacefully alongside us. Don't we owe them the same respect?" A profound silence followed Noah's words. Then slowly, applause began to build. First from the conservation advocates, then spreading to many others in the room who had been moved by the boy's sincerity and wisdom. The chairman of the Planning Commission, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Thank you, Noah. It's not often we hear from someone your age, especially someone with such a unique perspective. Would you be willing to work with our environmental assessment team to identify the most critical sections of this corridor? Perhaps there's a compromise that could protect essential wildlife passages while still allowing for some development." Noah nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am, I'd be honored to help." As they left the meeting that night, a local news crew approached, asking for an interview. Noah hesitated, looking to his parents for guidance. "It's up to you," Emma said gently. "You've already done more than enough." Noah considered for a moment, then turned to the reporter. "I'll talk to you, but I want to make sure people understand something important. This isn't just about bears, or even just about animals. It's about remembering that we share this world with other living beings who have as much right to be here as we do." The interview aired on local news that night and was picked up by national networks the following day. Noah's story, both his original encounter with the bears and his current efforts to protect their habitat, resonated with people across the country. Letters and emails poured in, many containing donations to the Conservation District's Land Acquisition Fund. 2 weeks later, the Planning Commission announced a revised proposal. The resort development would be scaled back significantly, preserving 80% of the forest corridor as protected wildlife habitat. The remaining development would incorporate wildlife-friendly design elements and fund ongoing conservation efforts in the area. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a meaningful compromise that reflected a community's growing understanding of its responsibility to the natural world, an understanding catalyzed by a boy who had once reached out in innocent compassion to a dying mother bear. That evening, as the Wilsons celebrated the news with a backyard dinner, Lily suddenly pointed toward the forest. "Noah, look," she whispered excitedly. At the tree line, 3 adult bears stood in silent observation. Faith in the center, flanked by what could only be her siblings, Hope and Courage. They had returned together, as if sensing the importance of the day's events. "They know," Noah said softly, a smile spreading across his face. "Somehow, they know." The bears remained for several minutes, their presence a powerful reminder of the bond that had been forged years ago. Then, with a synchronicity that seemed almost choreographed, they turned and disappeared into the protective embrace of the forest, a forest that would now remain their home for generations to come. As twilight deepened into dusk, a meteorological phenomenon rare for their region occurred. A spectacular aurora borealis began to dance across the northern sky, painting the heavens in shimmering curtains of green and gold and purple. The Wilson family stood in awe, watching the celestial display unfold above their small corner of the world. "It's like the sky is celebrating," Lily whispered, her small hand finding Noah's. Noah nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He thought of the mother bear who had started this extraordinary journey, how her final act of trust had rippled outward, touching countless lives and changing the way humans and wildlife might coexist. Perhaps, in some way beyond human understanding, she knew what her choice had set in motion. "Thank you," he whispered to the stars, his words carried away by the gentle night breeze. "I won't forget. I promise." The story of Noah Wilson and the bears of Pine Creek Forest became more than a local legend. It became a catalyst for change. As Noah grew into adulthood, he dedicated his life to wildlife conservation, eventually founding the Interspecies Communication Initiative, an organization dedicated to exploring and protecting the complex relationships between humans and wildlife. Faith, Hope, and Courage lived out their natural lives in the protected forest corridor, raising cubs of their own who carried forward an unusual heritage, an instinctive understanding that not all humans represented danger. This unique bear population became the subject of ongoing research, revealing subtle but significant differences in behavior, stress response, and problem-solving abilities compared to bears without their early positive human exposure. The Noah Protocol evolved into a sophisticated rehabilitation methodology adopted by wildlife centers around the world. Its fundamental insight, that brief, positive human interactions during critical developmental windows could create more resilient wild animals without compromising their natural behaviors, revolutionized approaches to orphaned wildlife care. On Noah's 21st birthday, a package arrived from Dr. Patel, who had since become the director of an international wildlife rehabilitation association. Inside was a leather-bound journal containing all the research papers, news articles, and personal observations documented throughout the years since that fateful day in the drainage pipe. The inscription on the first page read simply, "From one mother's desperate choice came a world of understanding." Never underestimate the power of compassion freely given. That evening, Noah walked alone to the forest edge, a pilgrimage he made every year on this day. The trees had grown taller, the forest more dense, but the invisible boundary between human space and wild space remained the same. As the setting sun painted the western sky in fiery hues, a rustling in the underbrush drew Noah's attention. From between the trees emerged an adult female bear, not Faith, who had passed away several years earlier, but one of her daughters, instantly recognizable by the distinctive white chest marking she had inherited from her mother. The bear regarded Noah with calm curiosity, neither approaching nor retreating. In her eyes, Noah saw the same intelligence, the same awareness that had marked his encounters with Faith and her siblings. This bear had never known the touch of human hands, had never been rehabilitated or studied. She was fully wild, born and raised in the forest. Yet somehow, through generations, the memory of trust had persisted. Noah bowed his head slightly in a gesture of respect. "Hello, little one," he said softly, using the same words he had spoken to Faith's cubs years ago. "Your grandmother saved my life, in a way. She taught me what really matters." The bear huffed softly, so like Faith's greeting that Noah's eyes filled with tears. Then she turned and melted back into the forest, a shadow among shadows, free and wild as nature intended. As night fell fully, Noah remained at the forest edge, a solitary figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. He was no longer the innocent toddler who had approached a dying bear without fear, nor the earnest boy who had spoken up to protect his wild friends. He was a man now, shaped by an extraordinary childhood experience into someone who straddled two worlds, the human world of science and policy and conservation, and the wild world of instinct and adaptation and survival. Yet in his heart, he remained the same Noah who had once offered water to a suffering creature, who had recognized the shared essence of all living beings before he could even form the words to express it. That recognition, that profound empathy had changed everything. As he turned to walk home, a chorus of distant howls rose from the depths of the forest. Wolves, another species that had returned to the area thanks to the protected corridor. Their voices echoed through the trees, wild and free and unapologetically themselves, a reminder of what had been saved and what remained possible when humans chose to share rather than dominate. Noah smiled, listening until the last howl faded into silence. Then he whispered the words that had become something of a personal mantra, a promise renewed each year on this special day. "As long as I live, you will have a voice. As long as I breathe, you will have a defender. This I vow, for the mother who trusted, for the cubs who remembered, and for all wild things everywhere who ask only for the chance to be." And somewhere in the vast web of energy that connects all living things, perhaps the spirit of a mother bear, who had once made an impossible choice in a drainage pipe beneath a country road, heard and understood that her final act of desperate hope had bloomed into something profound and lasting, a bridge between worlds that need not be separate after all. In the end, this was the most shocking thing the baby had done that day in the drainage pipe. He had reached across an ancient divide with innocent hands and touched not just a dying bear, but the very heart of what it means to share a planet with other beings. And in doing so, he had changed everything. 15 years later, Dr. Noah Wilson stood at the podium of the International Wildlife Conservation Conference in Geneva, Switzerland. At 36, he had become one of the world's leading authorities on interspecies communication and the complex cognitive capabilities of large predators. His pioneering research, built upon the foundation of his childhood encounters with faith, hope, and courage, had revolutionized humanity's understanding of animal consciousness. The Grand Hall was filled to capacity. Scientists, conservationists, policymakers, and students from around the globe had gathered to hear him speak. Behind Noah, a large screen displayed the title of his presentation, "Beyond Boundaries: Rethinking Human-Wildlife Relationships in the Climate Crisis Era." "We stand at a crossroads," Noah began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. "The accelerating climate crisis has forced wildlife populations into increasingly frequent contact with human settlements. Traditional approaches viewed these encounters as conflicts to be managed. But what if we've been asking the wrong questions all along? What if, instead of asking how to keep wild animals away from our spaces, we asked how we might better share the planet with them? As Noah spoke, images appeared on the screen behind him. Remarkable photographs of wildlife adaptation in human-altered landscapes. Bears using wildlife corridors to navigate between fragmented habitats. Wolves adjusting their hunting patterns to avoid human settlements. Mountain lions teaching their young specialized behaviors for surviving in peri-urban environments. Animals are adapting to our presence with remarkable speed and intelligence, Noah continued. The question is, can we adapt to theirs with equal flexibility? Can we move beyond the false dichotomy of wild versus human landscapes and imagine a world where coexistence becomes the new paradigm? From the front row, Emma Wilson watched her son with unmistakable pride. Now, in her 60s, she had retired from the Wildlife Center 5 years earlier, though she still volunteered regularly. Beside her sat Lily Wilson Chen, Noah's sister, now 26, and an accomplished wildlife veterinarian in her own right. Daniel had passed away 3 years earlier after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer, but his legacy lived on in the thousands of wildlife photographs that had helped change public perception of predator species from fearsome threats to essential members of healthy ecosystems. As Noah transitioned to the research portion of his presentation, he displayed a series of brain scans taken from bears in various states of interaction with humans. These neuroimaging studies reveal something extraordinary, he explained. When bears from the Pine Creek lineage, descendants of faith, hope, and courage, encounter humans at a safe distance, their amygdala activation patterns differ significantly from those of bears without their unique social history. He clicked to the next slide, showing the data in graph form. Put simply, where most wild bears experience fear and stress during human encounters, these bears show patterns consistent with cautious curiosity. They recognize humans as a distinct category, neither threat nor prey nor competitor, but as another intelligent species with whom a certain mutual respect is possible. Noah paused, allowing the significance of this finding to sink in. This remarkable difference has persisted through 4 generations of bears that never had direct positive contact with humans. It appears to be culturally transmitted. Mother bears teaching their cubs that humans observed from a safe distance can coexist with them in the landscape. In the audience, Dr. Ananya Patel, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, nodded in confirmation. Her decades of research monitoring the Pine Creek bear population had provided some of the most compelling evidence for cultural transmission of knowledge in non-human species. But the most significant discovery, Noah continued, came just last year, when our team documented what we believe to be intentional communication attempts from these bears toward human researchers. The audience stirred with interest as Noah played a video clip. The footage, captured by remote cameras, showed an adult female bear, a direct descendant of Faith, approaching a wildlife research station during a period when no humans were present. The bear deliberately stood on her hind legs and made a series of vocalizations while facing directly into the camera. Then, remarkably, she placed an object on the ground before departing. What you just witnessed has been repeated 8 times in the past year. Always by bears from the same maternal lineage, always with similar behavioral patterns, Noah explained. In each case, the object left behind was something human-made that had been improperly discarded in the forest. Plastic bottles, food wrappers, even, in one case, a deflated helium balloon that had drifted into their territory. A murmur spread through the audience as the implications became clear. Noah allowed a small smile before continuing. Yes, It appears these bears are deliberately returning human trash to us. They're not only recognizing these objects as not belonging in their environment, but they're making the cognitive leap to understand that humans are responsible for them and attempting to communicate this understanding back to us. The revelation drew scattered applause, which quickly spread throughout the hall. It was, by scientific standards, a bombshell discovery, one that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition and communication. "We've named this phenomenon reciprocal environmental stewardship," Noah explained once the applause subsided. "It suggests that, given the right conditions, some wildlife species may be capable of recognizing and responding to human conservation efforts with their own forms of cooperative behavior." Noah clicked to his final slide, which showed a simple black and white photograph, the drainage pipe where it all began, now preserved as part of the Pine Creek Forest Wildlife Sanctuary. 30 years ago, in that drainage pipe, a mother bear made a desperate choice to trust a human child with the lives of her cubs. That single act of trust, born of necessity and instinct, opened a door between our worlds that we're only now beginning to fully understand. Noah's voice softened with emotion. It suggests a possibility that indigenous cultures have recognized for millennia, but that modern science is only beginning to rediscover, that the boundary between human and wild may be far more permeable than we've allowed ourselves to believe. As the presentation concluded, Noah received a standing ovation. Questions from the audience revealed both excitement about the implications of his research and the inevitable skepticism that accompanies paradigm-shifting ideas. Noah addressed each question with the careful, evidence-based approach that had earned him respect even among his critics. Later that evening, at a small reception overlooking Lake Geneva, Noah found a moment of quiet on a terrace away from the crowd. The mountains loomed dark against the starlit sky, reminding him of the forests of his childhood home. "Your father would have been so proud." Emma's voice came from behind him as she joined him at the railing. "He always believed your connection with those bears was meant for something greater." Noah smiled, wrapping an arm around his mother's shoulders. "I still think about them every day, you know. Faith, hope, courage, and their mother. Sometimes I wonder if she somehow knew what she was starting." Emma considered this. "I used to think it was just desperation, a dying mother's last attempt to save her cubs, but over the years I've come to believe there was something more. She chose you, Noah. Out of all the humans who might have found her that day, she waited until it was you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights reflect off the dark water. Finally, Noah spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "The research team recorded something unusual last month at the Pine Creek Sanctuary. I wasn't going to mention it publicly yet because we're still analyzing the data, but—" He hesitated. "I wanted to tell you first." Emma gave him a curious look. "What is it?" "The bears have started building structures," Noah said simply. "Structures? What do you mean?" "Arrangements of branches and stones near the wildlife cameras. Deliberate patterns that don't serve any natural bear purpose. They're not dens, or feeding stations, or territorial markers. Well, they almost look like symbols." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you saying they're trying to communicate with us?" "That's one theory. Dr. Patterson thinks it might be a form of what she calls legacy marking, creating persistent modifications to the environment that convey information across time." Noah shook his head in wonder. "Whatever it is, it's unprecedented. Bears don't build symbolic structures in the wild. It's completely novel behavior." "When are you going back to study it?" Emma asked. "Next month. We're assembling an interdisciplinary team: zoologists, cognitive scientists, communication experts. even an anthropologist who specializes in the development of symbolic thinking. Noah turned to face his mother fully. "I'd like you to come too, if you're willing. You were there at the beginning. It feels right that you should be part of this next chapter." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The following month, Noah led a small team of researchers into the heart of the Pine Creek Forest Sanctuary. The protected area had expanded significantly over the decades, now encompassing over 50,000 acres of prime habitat, connected by wildlife corridors to larger wilderness areas beyond. Emma accompanied them, moving more slowly than in her younger years, but still fit enough to handle the moderate hike to the research station. Lily joined as well, having arranged coverage for her veterinary practice to participate in what might prove to be a historic expedition. The main research station was a small, unobtrusive structure designed to minimize disruption to wildlife patterns. Solar panels provided power for the sophisticated monitoring equipment, while satellite uplinks enabled real-time data transmission to universities and research centers around the world. Dr. Samira Khatri, the cognitive scientist, reviewed the footage captured over the previous months. "The structures first appeared approximately 12 weeks ago," she explained, pointing to time-stamped images on her tablet. "Always constructed by the same 3 bears, a mature female we believe to be a granddaughter of Faith, and her 2 subadult offspring." The images showed the bears deliberately arranging branches into distinct patterns, then placing stones at specific points within the arrangements. Over weeks, the structures had grown more complex, with consistent elements appearing across multiple sites. "They're building them within clear view of our cameras," Dr. Khatri noted. "That's significant in itself. They understand the cameras represent some form of human observation." Dr. Marcus Okafor, the anthropologist, studied the patterns with intense interest. "There are recurring motifs here that suggest intentional symbolic communication," he observed. "This circular arrangement with radiating lines appears in multiple structures, and this triangular configuration keeps reappearing." "Could it be coincidental?" asked one of the younger researchers. "Maybe they're just playing with objects they find interesting." Dr. Okafor shook his head. "The level of consistency across multiple sites and time periods argues strongly against random behavior. These bears are deliberately creating and maintaining these patterns. The question is, what are they trying to communicate?" As the scientists debated interpretations, Emma slipped outside, drawn by an instinct she couldn't quite name. The afternoon sun filtered through the forest canopy, creating a dappled pattern on the pine needle floor. She followed a narrow trail away from the station, breathing in the familiar scents of soil and vegetation. About 100 yards from the station, she came upon one of the structures they had been discussing. In person, it was more impressive than it had appeared on camera. A careful arrangement of branches forming a circular pattern about 6 feet in diameter, with stones placed at regular intervals around the circumference and a distinctive triangle of larger rocks at the center. Emma approached slowly, marveling at the precision of the construction. These weren't random piles of forest debris. This was deliberate, purposeful creation. A subtle movement in the underbrush caught her attention. Emma froze, her heart quickening as a large female bear emerged from between the trees. The bear's dark eyes fixed on Emma with unmistakable recognition, though they had never met before. This was Faith's granddaughter, the architect of the mysterious structures. Emma remained perfectly still, remembering all the protocols for bear encounters. But this didn't feel like a typical wildlife sighting. The bear wasn't displaying any signs of aggression or fear. She was simply watching, waiting. With deliberate movements, the bear approached the circular structure she had built. She looked at Emma, then down at the arrangement, then back at Emma again. The message couldn't have been clearer if she had spoken aloud. Look at what I've made. Understand. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the bear used her paw to adjust one of the branches, shifting it to more perfectly align with the others. Then the bear sat back on her haunches, regarding Emma with what could only be described as expectation. I see what you've created, Emma said softly, hardly aware she was speaking aloud. It's beautiful, but I don't understand what it means. The bear huffed, the same distinctive sound Emma remembered from Faith all those years ago. Then, to Emma's astonishment, the bear began to move around the perimeter of the circle, pausing at each stone to touch it with her nose. When she reached the triangular formation at the center, she stood upright on her hind legs and made a series of vocalizations unlike anything Emma had heard before. Drawn by the sounds, Noah and the other researchers emerged from the trail behind Emma. They stopped short at the sight before them, Emma standing transfixed as the massive bear performed what could only be described as a demonstration. "Mom," Noah whispered, fear for her safety evident in his voice. "It's okay," Emma replied without turning. "She's showing me something. She wants us to understand." The bear completed her circuit of the structure, then looked directly at Noah. Recognition flashed in her eyes, not of Noah specifically, for they had never met, but perhaps of something in him that echoed across generations. The same quality that had allowed a toddler to connect with a dying mother bear 3 decades earlier. Slowly, carefully, Noah moved to stand beside his mother. The rest of the research team remained a respectful distance behind, cameras and sensors quietly documenting the extraordinary encounter. "The triangle," Dr. Okafor whispered from behind them. "In many human cultures, the triangle represents a mountain or peak, and the circle often symbolizes wholeness or protection." The bear huffed again, then did something truly astonishing. She reached out with a massive paw and deliberately dragged 3 parallel lines in the soft earth beside the structure. Noah inhaled sharply. 3 lines, 3 cubs. Faith, hope, and courage. Emma whispered, understanding dawning. She's telling the story, their story. The bear watched them intently, seeming to gauge their comprehension. Then she added a 4th mark, a smaller line connecting to the others. "Noah," Emma breathed. "That's you." The silence that followed was profound. A moment of connection across an evolutionary divide so vast it had once seemed unbridgeable. The bear held Noah's gaze for a long, meaningful moment. Then, with a soft chuff that sounded almost like satisfaction, she turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving the humans to contemplate what they had witnessed. That night, gathered around the research station's main table, the scientific team struggled to process the implications of what they had seen. "If we're interpreting this correctly," Dr. Khatri said, reviewing the footage they had captured, "this bear is using symbolic representation to communicate a narrative about her own family's history. That's a cognitive leap we haven't documented in any non-human species outside of rudimentary language experiments with great apes. And those were always in controlled settings, with intensive human training," Dr. Okafor added. "This is spontaneous symbolic communication emerging in a wild population. It's revolutionary." Noah sat quietly, still processing the emotional impact of the encounter. "She wasn't just telling a story," he said finally. "She was acknowledging a connection, honoring it. The question is, how do we respond?" Lily asked, ever practical. "If they're attempting to communicate with us, don't we have an ethical obligation to try communicating back?" The discussion continued late into the night, scientific caution wrestling with the undeniable wonder of what they had witnessed. By morning, they had developed a plan. They would create their own symbolic structure nearby, incorporating elements from the bear's design but adding new components that represented human commitment to protecting the forest. Over the next several days, under Noah's direction, the team carefully constructed a response, a circular arrangement similar to the bear's, but with a distinctive pattern of stones representing the boundaries of the protected sanctuary, and a simple wooden carving of a human hand and bear paw reaching toward one another. They positioned remote cameras to capture any response, then withdrew to the research station to wait. 2 days passed with no activity. Then, on the third morning, the sensors alerted them to movement near their structure. The footage showed not one but 3 bears approaching the human-made symbol, Faith's granddaughter and her 2 nearly grown cubs. The bears inspected the creation thoroughly, sniffing each component and studying the carved image with evident interest. Then, to the researchers' amazement, they began to modify it, adding branches to extend the circle and placing additional stones that expanded the pattern outward. They're enlarging the territory representation, Dr. Okafor realized, studying the footage. They're telling us the protected area should be bigger. Noah sat back, a mixture of awe and amusement crossing his face. Are we actually negotiating land conservation policy with bears? It seemed they were. Over the following weeks, a remarkable exchange unfolded. The research team would modify the symbolic structures, and the bears would respond with their own adaptations. Gradually, a shared vocabulary of meanings began to emerge, specific arrangements that represented water sources, dangerous areas, preferred feeding grounds. Word of the extraordinary interspecies conversation, spread through scientific circles, initially met with profound skepticism. But as more researchers visited the site and witnessed the interactions firsthand, skepticism gave way to cautious acceptance of a possibility that would have seemed absurd just years earlier: that non-human animals might possess cognitive capacities for symbolic thinking far beyond what humans had previously imagined possible. 6 months into the project, now named the Pine Creek Dialogue, Noah received an urgent call from the research station. He had been away at a conference, presenting their preliminary findings to an international audience. "You need to come back," Lily told him, her voice tight with emotion. "Something's happened. Something big." Noah returned to find the research team in a state of controlled excitement. The bears had created something new, not modifications to the existing symbolic structures, but an entirely novel construction nearly a quarter-mile away. "We almost missed it," Lily explained as they hiked to the location. "It's outside our regular monitoring area. A wildlife photographer spotted it by chance and contacted us." When they arrived, Noah stopped short, momentarily overwhelmed by what he saw. The bears had created a massive arrangement covering nearly 50 square meters. At its center was a perfectly formed spiral of stones, surrounded by concentric circles of branches and smaller stones. Leading away from the spiral were 7 distinct paths marked by parallel lines of pebbles, each path extending in a different direction. "It's a map," Dr. Okafor said in hushed wonder, "a map of the entire watershed." Detailed analysis over the following days confirmed his interpretation. The spiral represented the heart of the sanctuary, while the 7 paths accurately corresponded to the major wildlife corridors connecting to other protected areas. The bears had created a comprehensive spatial representation of their entire territory, something that would have required not only sophisticated spatial cognition, but the ability to translate 3-dimensional landscape knowledge into 2-dimensional symbolic form. Even more remarkably, the map contained elements that appeared to represent future dangers, symbolic markers positioned precisely in areas where development was planned but had not yet begun. Somehow, the bears had integrated information about human intentions that they could only have gathered through observation and deduction. They're not just communicating, Noah realized. They're problem-solving. They're trying to work with us to protect their home. The implications were staggering. If bears, animals humans had hunted, feared, and misunderstood for millennia, possessed these cognitive capacities, what other insights and intelligences existed in the natural world that humans had failed to recognize? As the research continued, Noah found himself returning often to the drainage pipe where it all began. Now preserved as a small memorial site within the sanctuary, the concrete tunnel had weathered over the decades but remained largely intact. A simple bronze plaque nearby read, "Here, in a moment of desperate trust, a mother bear entrusted her cubs to a human child." From this unlikely beginning grew a new understanding of what is possible when fear gives way to compassion. On a crisp autumn day, 31 years after that fateful encounter, Noah sat beside the old pipe, lost in reflection. The forest had changed over the decades. Trees had grown taller. Understory vegetation had shifted with changing climate patterns. New species had arrived, while others had moved on. Yet something essential remained unchanged, the capacity for connection across boundaries that once seemed impermeable. A soft rustling in the leaves alerted him to a presence. Noah looked up to see a massive male bear standing at the forest edge. An older bear with graying muzzle and watchful eyes. Around his neck was the faint scar left by a tracking collar long since removed. "Courage," Noah whispered, recognizing the last surviving member of the original trio of cubs. Now, in his third decade, Courage had long since established his own territory deeper in the protected forest, rarely venturing this close to the sanctuary boundaries. The ancient bear regarded Noah with unmistakable recognition. They had not seen each other in many years, yet the connection remained. A living thread stretching back to that extraordinary day when a toddler had offered comfort to a dying mother. Courage approached slowly, his movements stiff with age but still powerful. Noah remained seated, showing neither fear nor the urge to retreat. When the bear was just 10 feet away, he stopped and sat back on his haunches, his dark eyes fixed on Noah's face. For a long moment neither moved. Then Courage did something unprecedented in Noah's long experience with bears. He lowered his massive head in what appeared to be a deliberate bow, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even of gratitude. Noah, moved beyond words, returned the gesture. When he raised his head again, tears blurred his vision. By the time he could see clearly, Courage had already turned away, disappearing into the forest with the quiet dignity that had always characterized him. That evening, Noah called a meeting of the entire research team. "What we've discovered here isn't just about bears," he told them. "It's about the possibilities that emerge when we approach the natural world with humility and openness instead of assumptions and fear." He outlined a vision for expanding their research, applying the principles they had developed with the Pine Creek bears to other species and ecosystems. If bears can communicate symbolically, what might whales be expressing through their songs? What might elephants be conveying through their complex social rituals? What conversations might be happening all around us that we've been too limited in our thinking to recognize? As the discussion unfolded, Emma slipped outside, drawn once again to the quiet of the forest evening. The first stars were appearing above the canopy, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. She thought of Daniel, wishing he could have lived to see how far their son's journey had taken him. She thought of the mother bear, whose desperate choice in a drainage pipe had rippled outward through decades, changing countless lives both human and wild. A soft, familiar voice spoke beside her. "Penny for your thoughts?" Noah had followed her outside, his tall frame now matching her own shadow in the gathering darkness. Emma smiled. "I was just thinking about beginnings and endings, how we never really know which is which at the time." Noah nodded, understanding. When that mother bear died, it seemed like an ending, but it was really the beginning of something none of us could have imagined. They stood in companionable silence, listening to the forest sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the soft padding of unseen creatures going about their nightly routines. A world full of intelligence and awareness and history, now opening itself to human understanding in ways that would have once seemed impossible. "What happens next?" Emma asked finally. Noah considered the question, his gaze fixed on the stars emerging above. "I think we keep listening," he said simply. "And I think we remember what that baby in the drainage pipe knew instinctively, that compassion is the key that unlocks doors between worlds." From deep within the forest came the soft, huffing call of a bear. Not a sound of threat or warning, but something that sounded remarkably like an affirmation, like agreement, like hope. And in that moment it seemed to Emma that the most extraordinary bridge had been built, not of concrete or steel, but of understanding and respect, spanning the ancient divide between human and wild. A bridge that had begun with a baby's innocent compassion for a dying mother bear, and now extended toward a future where such connections might become not miraculous exceptions, but the healing rule. The most shocking thing that baby had done, all those years ago, was to remind humanity of a truth it had long forgotten, that we are not separate from the natural world, but integral to it. And in that remembering lay the seeds of transformation, for the bears, for the humans who studied them, and perhaps, in some small but significant way, for the world itself.